All right, so we're to part three, and that's proof of the actual resurrection. And I'm going to break this down into two parts. We're going to look at two separate things. Number one, facts of the empty tomb, and secondly, facts about the eyewitness accounts of Jesus walking the earth after his crucifixion. So, looking at the empty tomb first, what are the facts that support the empty tomb? And what we'll do is we'll look at that from the same four criteria that historians have used to add validity to the execution of Jesus. We mentioned last time that pretty much across the board, scholars and historians all agree that Jesus was executed and that there's no evidence to refute that. And that's based on four criteria: the criteria of embarrassment, the criteria of multiple attestation, the criteria of coherence, and the criteria of rejection. So we'll look at the same thing, the criteria of embarrassment first off. And this is huge, this is a big deal in I believe, when we look at proving the empty tomb based on the Gospels account, or the Gospel accounts rather. If you look at the Gospel accounts, the way that it is described would be extremely difficult to overcome in the first century for a couple of reasons. Number one, the 11 disciples that are left, the major religion at the time, the religion that they'd probably been brought up in, or at least were exposed to, was Judaism. If you look at the early leaders of the Jewish faith, people like Moses, Joshua, King David, these are very strong people. These are very strong leaders. That's who they would have looked at for guidance and would have attempted to model themselves after. But what were they doing on day one of the week, after Jesus is executed? They're hiding. They're being cowards, and they're hiding in the upper room because they were afraid of arrest. Why weren't they down there waiting to find that tomb empty? Because they didn't know it was going to happen. They didn't think it was going to happen. They'd already given up hope. In fact, whenever Jesus is arrested, most of them run, hide. Peter even says, "I don't even know who the guy is." So it's very harmful to them to give the account the way that they did. Secondly, who are the first two people to find the empty tomb? Two women. Now, for us in the 21st century, that's not that big of a deal. In the first century, that's huge. That's huge. Number one, the guys that are getting ready to start preaching this and start trying to convince people of their ideology are going to have to say the first people who found the tomb empty wasn't us, because we were hiding, we were scared. It was two women. That's embarrassing. That's embarrassing in the first century. Secondly, women couldn't even be witnesses in the first century. The Romans didn't accept it. The Jews didn't accept it. That was just the way it was. Women were considered untruthful on their face. Yet they're going to say that the first two people to find the tomb are women. The first two witnesses to what they're going to start preaching wouldn't even be able to testify in court. Yet they're going to put it on them. Why do it that way? Why not say it was two disciples, unless it was actually two women that did it? Because the 11 were actually cowering down in an upper room. So it's extremely embarrassing for them to give the account the way they did. Secondly, the account, or the criteria of multiple attestation. You have multiple people that say the tomb was empty. In fact, the Romans say the tomb was empty. In fact, the Jews say the tomb was empty, because they start giving these accounts later on down the road as to why the tomb was empty. In fact, the Jewish polemics, which was written in an attempt to dissuade the Jewish community from converting to Christianity, never try to say or never try to contest the fact that the tomb was empty. They merely give explanations as to why it was empty. So if they're going to try to prevent Jews from converting to Christianity, why not just simply say, the tomb wasn't empty. He's in there. I'll come show you. So everybody says the tomb was empty. Obviously, the criteria of coherence, we know what was going on at the time was historically accurate based on what we'd already looked at in the execution account. Secondly, when we talk about what's going on around at that time, look at where they first started preaching this. Where was it that the 11 start proclaiming the tomb was found empty? Within walking distance of the tomb. They don't even leave the area to start preaching it whenever they finally start preaching it. If the tomb wasn't in fact empty, why not go 100 miles away to start preaching it, where people couldn't go and view the tomb for themselves? It's not like today where we don't have the luxury of being able to go and see whether or not there is an empty tomb or to see if there was a body in there. They were preaching this at a time when people could have walked to the tomb. They describe where the tomb is at and even name it. People could have gone and looked and viewed and smelled for themselves. If it's a hoax, if it's not real, if they've concocted this story, why do it where people can go view the evidence themselves if it's not accurate? Finally, the criteria of rejection. Nobody rejects it. The Jews don't reject the fact the tomb was empty. There's no writings to reject the fact the tomb was empty. There's nobody that says, nope, they were wrong. I went and I saw the body and the body was rotting and the body rotted away. Nobody says that. The only other accounts other than the gospel accounts say, yeah, the tomb was empty because the body was stolen or because of this other explanation. And real quick, was the body stolen? Because that is the other popular account that's out there to explain away why the tomb was empty. If the body was stolen, who would have stolen the body? Would the Jews have stolen the body? No. It was their idea to put him to death. They wanted him dead to squash this movement that was happening. Why steal the body to add credence to what he was teaching? Why steal the body to give the disciples an opportunity to say, see, he was right. He is Lord. The Jews wanted to squash this. This was a threat to their power. So if the body was there, why not drag that body down the middle of Main Street in Jerusalem and say, see, they're lying. There he is right here. But they didn't because they couldn't. So would the Jews have stolen it? No. Would the Romans have stolen it? Absolutely not. The Romans were concerned with power at the time, and power and fear and being able to control the people. But yet, would the Romans have put their seal on the tomb, posted their guards outside for a couple of days later for people to be able to go, somebody stole a body through your seal and around your guards? No, that shows them to be vulnerable. So I don't think the Romans would have done it. Would the disciples have done it? A lot of people say they had the most to gain from it. I would agree with that. But what were the disciples doing when Jesus was arrested? They were running. They were scared. They were afraid of being arrested. In fact, going so far as to say, we don't even know who that guy is. Where are they when the women go to the tomb? They're hiding out in an upper room. They're afraid to go out in public. But yet, people say they were the ones that were willing to go past the Roman guards, break into a tomb, and steal the body, running the risk of being arrested or being put to death. So one day they're so cowardly they won't even acknowledge that they know the guy, yet 2 or 3 days later they've got the courage to go and break into a tomb and steal the body. I don't know. So that's that. Again, use logic, come up with what you will. I'll leave you with this. The historian Michael Grant, who himself is a skeptic of the resurrection, says this: if we apply the same sort of criteria that we would apply to any other ancient literary sources, then the evidence is firm and plausible enough to necessitate the conclusion that the tomb was indeed found empty. That's the historical viewpoint. Tomorrow morning is Easter. I hope you have a happy Easter, and be safe.